Lord, thank you for revealing how you're going to take care of your people, how you took care of Elijah, how you took care of that widow, how you took care of her son. Thank you for your great ways that you care about us. You give us this big book called the Bible to tell us that we matter to you, and we tend to forget that. And we ask that you would remind us of how deliberate you are to care for us, to speak to us, that we would actually hear not a word coming from a man, but actually the very words of God in a man. And we're amazed at that you would do that. And that's even what you taught this widow in the story of Elijah, how his words were your words, and how astounding that is. And so we want to reflect what you say to us, and we ask that you would energize each member of this church to carry out the very call that this text is going to have on us, and that we would understand your glory in it. Thank you for the book of 1 Timothy, and we ask that you would continue to have us grow in understanding your church through this book. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So turn to 1 Timothy. Turn to 1 Timothy chapter 3, just to remind us what this book is about, as if I haven't reminded you of this enough yet. But if you haven't memorized it, maybe you don't know what this book is about, if you haven't memorized this verse. 1 Timothy 3:15. Paul writes, "If I delay, you," and he's speaking to Timothy, "may know how one ought to behave in the household of God, which is the church, the living church of the living God, a pillar and buttress of the truth. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. He was manifest in the flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory." So what is this mystery of godliness but Christ lived out in the flesh? And that's now what your ministry is. You are now, as you have been given the Holy Spirit, you live out what Christ would do if he was here in the flesh. Isn't that amazing? That's a high calling for you. It's really beyond our comprehension, and it's quite astounding. And so how do we do that? How do we live out Christ in the flesh? Well, the title this morning of this message is "The Glory of Christ in the Ministry of Widows." And that has a double meaning. The glory of Christ in the ministry of widows. And you will see what I mean by that. But here's a comfort that I want for you. If you have a mother, Christ has commanded the church to care for her when she is not able to have someone caring for her like her husband anymore. If you are an older woman and you've lost your husband, Christ has a way to take care of you. He is going to make sure you're taken care of. That's what this passage is about. If you're married and you may die before your wife, your confidence should be in how Christ cares for widows through his church. If you're a father and you're worried about your children's future, and if your children get married and if they lose their husband, what's going to happen to them? Here is where you find your confidence, because Christ is very clear about caring for widows. How did Christ care for widows? Look with me back at Luke 7. Luke 7. Luke 7, starting in verse 11. Verse 11 reads, "Soon afterward he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. So a widow with an only son. And a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched the bier, and the briars stood still. So just get this picture in your mind, right? They're walking out carrying this dead boy, and he stops the funeral procession. I don't know if you've ever seen this happen. Probably not, right? It's amazing if you think about it. All the town, all these people. This is a funeral procession, and one man walks up and puts his hand on the coffin and tells her not to weep. And he said, "Young man." And he starts talking to the body. Isn't that amazing? "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. So there is how Jesus took care of a widow. And you're thinking, okay, so our ministry to widows would be what? Right? You're like, all right, so is our church going to now begin a ministry of raising the dead? No. But Jesus has got this covered. And what I mean by that is Jesus once was addressing a rich young ruler. Remember that? That's a few chapters up. Look in Luke 18, if you'd like. This is where this takes place. A rich young ruler comes up. And Jesus says, "Leave all you have and follow me." And that's exactly what the disciples had already done. They left everything and followed him. They're following Jesus. Jesus calls this rich young ruler to follow him. "Forsake everything and follow me." And he doesn't do it. And then Peter is now making an observation. Verse 28, "See, we have left our homes and followed you." And here's what Jesus says. "Truly I say to you, there is no one who has left house or wife or brothers or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom of God who will not receive many more in this time and in the age to come." So how will Jesus take care of you as a widow, or take care of those widows that we love? It will be through his rich body of believers. Like right now, there are ladies in this church who, if the older ladies get to know the younger ladies, they get spiritual daughters. They get spiritual sons. They get to know the younger men. Do you see? And the younger men get spiritual fathers as they come to this church. They have more spiritual fathers now than they had before. Do you see how Christ takes care of his people? He will give abundant life, right? When he says abundant life, look around. The people around you have your back. Think of that. That's the abundant life. Christ has filled this body with his life. And that's what he's expecting to use to care for one another. Isn't that amazing? So Jesus has this covered. Now, you might not raise the dead, or someone might not raise someone from the dead to care for you, but he's going to give you an abundance of family to care for you. He cares. So you can repeatedly cast your care on him. So now, back to 1 Timothy. Oh, I wanted to give you one more illustration of this. So there was a time where Jesus was surrounded by unbelievers, and he was in the midst of being tortured to death, and he was hung between two criminals, and the pressure of all our sin was crushing him to death, and God was pouring out his wrath on him. And Jesus, at that moment, with the world on his shoulders, looks down at a woman and says, "Woman, behold your son." And then he looks at John and he says, "Behold your mother." So, Jesus, even with the weight of the world and the wrath of God upon him, looked out for his widow, his mother who was a widow. That's amazing, isn't it? How committed is he for the church to take care of widows? So now, look at 1 Timothy 5:3. Verse 3 says, "Honor widows who are truly widows." Now, something you must understand is this is just another way that we can watch our life and doctrine closely, right? Notice verse 16. "Keep a close watch on yourself and your teaching. Persist in this, for by doing so you will save both yourselves and your hearers." So one of the ways that we will watch our lives and our doctrine is by honoring those who God says to honor. Do you see? So the context here is Timothy has been given a command to keep a close watch on himself and his teaching, which would include saving both himself and his hearers. And here is the way that is done practically is you take care of people that can't take care of themselves. And so God is calling the church to honor widows who are truly widows. He goes on, "But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day, but she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for the members of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been a wife of one husband, having a reputation for good works. If she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. But refuse to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed after Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows." So there's a lot of instructions here, you see. And let me give you a little outline understanding of what he's actually commanding in this. The first command is in verse 3, honor widows. Just like command, honor your father and mother, well, honor widows. Honor widows who are truly widows. This is what James 1:27 calls what? True religion. True religion is not a pair of jeans. Okay? True religion, people look at me like, that's strange, and the young people totally understand. There's a brand, True Religion, and it's jeans. So, it is not that. True religion is looking out for those who cannot look out for themselves. That's what true religion is. Now think about this. Looking after orphans and widows, if that's true religion, that's also walking in the light, isn't it? It's having fellowship with one another. So realize that this is the reason the church is to care for those who cannot care for themselves. And it's the Lord caring for people through his church. So the first command is honor them. The second command is addressed to children and grandchildren to learn to show godliness to their own household. So there is the command for anybody who has parents, for anybody who has grandparents. From the Bible, you should learn to show godliness to their own household. And then he goes on to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. So you're to learn to do that. That is the first thing. Notice, it's a priority. Let them first. So the command is, as children and grandchildren, the priority is to show godliness to your parents and please God by doing so. And have some return towards them, to honor them. Because they cared for you, now you care for them. So that in this line of responsibilities, the first line of responsibility falls to the children and the grandchildren, the immediate family. Now, the reason that is to free the church up to help those who don't have those kind of people. Do you see? So these are lines of defense, lines of responsibility, how you're going to care for people. How are you going to care for? How do you want Christ to care for the people around you? And this is what he's laying out very practically. It's very simple, isn't it? It's almost like, no kidding. Kids should take care of their parents. Grandchildren should take care of their grandparents. That's the first line. The second line is in verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially the members of his own household. In other words, it's not just immediate family at that point. It might be extended family. It might be an aunt. It might be someone who is somewhat in the extended family. And if they're in the extended family, you should look to care for them. Anyone, verse 8, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially for members of his own household. See? Relatives maybe not be those in your own household. He has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So there's the second line, extended family. The third line is believing women. Look at verse 16. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her, this is a command, let her care for them. So there's the third line. And the fourth line is then the church. The church is to take care of people who are truly widows. So, now let's ask some questions. So, what are the questions here? Who is a widow? Who's truly a widow? Verse 3, notice, honor widows who are truly widows. So now we got to figure out who a true widow is. Notice verse 5. She who is a truly a widow. Right? Notice verse 16. The passage ends with, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. Right? So what's this passage about? True widows. So, the glory of Christ in the ministry of true widows. So that's what this whole passage is about. How do we see the glory of Christ in the ministry of true widows? You know, it's really interesting in the Old Testament. You know how they define wickedness repeatedly? Turning away widows. Doing no good to the widow, stealing from a widow. All those are in Job 22 and 24. In other words, we wanted to show, these guys want to show Job, this is how, you must have done that. For all this bad stuff to be happening to you, Job, you must have stolen from a widow, be doing no good to a widow, and you must be turning away widows. And that is the picture from the Bible of great wickedness. And here, if you're taking care of a widow, notice, you're blessed. You're actually blessed. I mean, look at Elijah. He shows up to take care of a widow, to be taken care of by a widow. And then he ends up taking care of the widow. Isn't that amazing? Right? He comes to her for food. She's like, I don't got any food. And he's like, you got food. I know who the Lord is, and he'll provide for you. And then her son dies, and then he raises her and gives her back her son. So, who is truly a widow? Verse 5. She who is truly a widow. First, left all alone. Notice, it doesn't say the husband died. It just says she's left all alone. So, why she's left all alone is not specified. But a widow is one who has been left all alone. Most of the time, it would be death, but there can be other circumstances, couldn't there? Has set her hope on God, so there's a true widow. Now, remember, a true widow, according to the Bible, is one who the church is going to take care of. The church is not going to be taking care of widows necessarily who aren't believers. And you'll see why that is as we go here. But in this case, this is a woman who has her hope set on God, which means what? She's a believer. So a true widow is a believer. A true widow is alone. For whatever reason, she is alone. And notice, she continues. This is third, right? First, she's left all alone. Second, she set her hope on God. She's a believer. And she continues in supplications and prayers night and day. That sound like anybody you know? That's Anna, right? That was Anna in the temple, right? When Jesus showed up as an infant, that's what she was doing. She was giving herself to that night and day. This is a true widow. Notice verse 6. But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. In other words, if the church is saying we're going to take care of a widow who isn't a believer and they're just going to go on living their life, what are the chances of that woman going and doing things that would not honor the church, would not honor Christ, right? She can't. And you wouldn't expect her to. She's going to do what she wants to do. So notice, dead even when she lives. How is that phrase used? Well, remember Jesus says, let the dead bury their dead. It's speaking of believers. Speaking of non-believers. And remember the prodigal son. My son was dead, and now he's alive. It's somebody who's living however they want. They're self-indulgent. They're not Christ-exalting. They want to do things their way. They're not interested in honoring the Lord, and they're not interested. Their hope is not set on God. They are not continuing in prayer and supplications all the time. So this is the definition of one who is truly a widow. And then Paul says, command these things as well so that they may be without reproach. In other words, Timothy is now to let the church know this is the way widows should be. This is the definition of a true widow. So, what's the children and grandchildren responsibility? Well, they're to honor their parents. Remember in the Bible, there's this guy who says, it's actually Pharisees, right? They say, Corbin, I don't have to take care of my family because I've given my money to God. See, that's not honoring your parents. And Jesus is faulting them for that. So honoring your parents doesn't just mean respect, doesn't just mean care for, it means even financially care for. It means financial support. So they're to honor them. They're to learn to show a godlike care for them, paying back something of what they've been given, and in order to please God. So that's the responsibility for children and grandchildren in regard to a widow. Now, look at 11, verse 11. He says, but refuse to enroll younger widows. Now, I guess I got to do this first. So, what is this enroll idea? We got to get that clear, right? Don't let a widow be enrolled. So, a lot of commentators aren't sure what that means, but there were widows in churches that were doing ministries. Lydia, right? Dorcas. There's widows in churches, in the church, in Acts, doing many ministries, and they're kind of gathered together. And so as you see that, what this enrollment is not just those who are being supported, but it is those who are in a ministry. Isn't that interesting? Now, that's why I titled this The Glory of Christ in the Ministry of Widows. Meaning, are we ministering to widows? Yeah. But are widows also ministering? Yeah. And we'll see that in a few minutes. But right now I just want to show you why they're refusing certain widows. So then we'll look at their ministry. So verse 11, but refuse to enroll younger widows. And then the word for, which is giving a reason, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Now, former faith does not mean they were believers and now they're not. It means it can be translated pledge as well. In other words, they've made a promise and they're saying, I'm going back on my promise, because their promise was to be part of this enrollment that says we are going to minister to the church as widows. Now, the problem came when a young widow who was really devastated about losing her husband, in whatever way or form, she lost him. And she's like, I'm done. I'm done. She's 30, let's say. And I'm done with men. I am not interested in that anymore. I don't want that. I just want to commit myself to the church. I'm just going full bore to the church. I'm going to serve the church. I'm pledging to serve the church. And then, as she serves the church, she goes to other people's houses in order to teach small children or watch children of families, right? She's involved in the lives of the church. And then, a few years pass. She's not so angry anymore. And she's kind of like, a lot of these marriages that I'm seeing, man, kind of wish I had that. And then, if sin gets its way, she might find that as she's in those houses, she might start being a bit of a busybody, or an idler, or a gossip in this context. She might be just going around house to house, hearing stuff, and then telling other people, and because she's got lots of energy, and she's thinking maybe I can get one of those husbands that I've been helping the children out. He's really nice. See, it just leads to problems. Apparently it did. That's why he says it this way, right? Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not say. So there's why Paul says don't put them on the list, because putting them on the list is saying they're now giving to full-time ministry to the church and being supported by the church to be freed up to do ministry in some form or fashion. So what is the advice? So what happens? What are we to tell younger women who lose their husbands? Well, here's what Paul says. I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed after Satan. So there's the danger. There's the potential danger. Why? Because God has made it so a woman wants to help a man. A woman wants those kind of roles. A woman desires those kind of roles. Now, in our culture, some of that's been brainwashed by many. Or if God's given you the gift of celibacy, hey, that's a gift from God. Go for it. If you're a young woman, right? If He's given you that gift, absolutely, and you will have an effective ministry. So the question then becomes, well, okay, if I'm a younger woman, if I have the gift of celibacy, or if I'm an older woman and I'm not looking to get married again just because I'm just not looking to get married again because I'm older and I've done that and I've raised children. And now I want to give my life to Christ in a way that I just want to pour my life into that realm. And I want to help younger women. I want to help marriages. I want to help them do well, right? That's what Titus says. Older women are to teach younger women. Let's say they want to do that. Well, what's that look like? Well, here's the enrollment right here. Verse 9. Let a widow be enrolled. Now we're saying Enrolled can mean that the church is supporting them, and it could mean the church isn't supporting them. If they don't need support, they can be enrolled and be helping other widows and other families. See how God has really thought through this, isn't he? I mean, this is really, he's got it covered. He's got all the bases covered. Let a widow be enrolled, and there's 3 qualifications. Then he goes into great detail on the 3rd qualification. So the first qualification is not less than 60 years of age. The second qualification is having been the wife of one husband. This is a parallel phrase to a one-woman man. This is a one-man woman. Now, does that mean she was only married once? No. That means that characteristically in her life, she has committed to one man at a time faithfully as Christ would want. Okay, so we're not saying, she's never been with more than one husband. This is just saying having been a one-woman kind of man, a one-man kind of woman. And then the third qualification for the widow to be on this list is a reputation for good works. Now, what does that look like? In other words, if I want to be an effective ministering woman in the church, what should I be doing? Or what should I have done if I want to be an older woman, effective in the church? Now, if you're a younger woman and you have the gift of celibacy, that's a whole different thing, but these things could still be true of you. And if you are a woman who hasn't been able to have kids or these kind of things, that does not disqualify you to serve at all, right? In fact, you've probably been freed up to serve in ways that other women haven't. That women who have to stay at home and take care of their kids, they haven't. So maybe you've served in different ways the Lord that other women who had kids just couldn't do it. And that is also a ministry that Christ carries out through you. So, as you look at this list of these qualifications of good works, here's things that you want to recognize that are true of women. And guys, as you're looking for a girl, or ladies, as you're looking to be a girl who is like Christ, here's some of the qualifications. I mean, you can read Proverbs 31, sure, but you got a great start right here. So, again, though, we are talking about those who enrolled in being widows. So the first one, brought up children, is proof of something. It's proof of something, isn't it? It's proof of faithfulness, right? Look at, just like one page over, 2 Timothy 1:5. What's that say? Paul's telling Timothy, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. You see, these women were faithful women. Now, realize there was this story MacArthur was telling about, I think it was Alexander McLaren was sitting with a woman, and she was complaining how she wasted her life. And she has 4 sons. And she says, I just feel like I've kind of wasted my life. I really haven't done anything. I've just kind of, worked around the house. And she's in her apron and everything as she's telling him this. And, I've just washed dishes and done things, just, mundane things. And he says, well, tell me about your son or your 4 sons. Oh, yeah, well, I named them after the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And he goes, oh, yeah, well, what are they doing? Well, you know what they're doing. Matthew, he's gone off into the mission field. He's in Africa. And John, he's teamed up with Matthew in Africa. And Luke has gone into China and is a missionary there. and then my youngest son, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Mark, he just told me the other night that he's feeling called to Russia. Alexander McLaren says, boy, I don't know. You sound like you feel like you haven't done anything, but boy, I want to be there when I see your reward. I mean, you think about that, right? And see, that's this. Brought up children. What a honor. But yet in our culture that you are at war with, they attack this. They limit this. I'm watching this sad video the other day of these people who are living in trying to see it. An area that is about as half this stage, okay, even smaller, and they go in there and they have a computer and they sleep on the floor. And there's all these rooms in this one thing, and all that's in there is a computer, and people are living there, and they like living there. They like being alone. No one bothers me here. And in Asia, they have this is actually Japan, they have this other problem where people keep dying in their apartments and nobody knows it. It'll go 2 weeks. And nobody will know. Because everybody's so segregated. And they're stopping having children. And at one point in the video, they were showing these two women pushing strollers. And then they're talking about limiting children. And there's two women pushing. They scan down. Guess what's in the stroller? Dogs. So, here's what Satan's doing. He's dividing people. He's segregating people. He does not want you to have relationships. In fact, that's what the one lady, they actually interviewed the lady whose dad was found dead in the apartment. And they said, why is this such a problem here? She says, because there's a constant separation from community. And isn't that sad? And see, so this is why it's so important that a godly woman would show hospitality, bring up children. I mean, these are just the opposite of what they're trying to do there in socialism and such. And that's where we're moving to in some ways. And we need to be on guard for that. And the way we're on guard for that is we know each other. We love each other. We spend time with each other. We forgive one another repeatedly, constantly. And that's the only way it's going to work. And that's what these women are examples of. These women are to be examples of good work. So showing hospitality. So turn to Acts 16. Just think about how many people of this church have you had at your house? Have you had over? And maybe you don't want them over. Well, then you need to pray and you need to say, God, I need you to change my heart. Well, my house is a mess. Yeah. Have you been to my house? Has it been a mess at times when you come over? Is there some dog hair on the floor? Is there a dog you got to step around, climb over, and get a ladder to get over? So, look at this. Go to just verse 13. Acts 16:13. And on the Sabbath day we went outside the gate to the riverside where we supposed there was a place of prayer. And we sat down and spoke to the women who had come together. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. And after she was baptized, and her household as well, she urged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. See that last sentence? And she prevailed upon us. Here's the picture of hospitality. Here's a picture of hospitality. Is that a goal for you? Is it a goal for you to have your house be a thoroughfare for the people of Christ? Is your house a place of comfort and of building up saints and encouraging them? Ladies, gentlemen, right? This is for ladies, but this is just an overall principle for the church as well. Because this is what she's done. This is qualifications for ministry. I mean, isn't it interesting? This text here, talking about these older women who have done these things, what follows after this text? Let elders who rule well be considered worthy. Elders. These are the ministers of the church. Listen, some of you guys have recently retired, and some ladies are married to retired guys. Let me just tell you, this may be the most fruitful time in your entire life. I'm speaking to Frank at Union Gospel Mission. Here's an older guy. And he's been in prison, and he's out of prison now, and he's at Union Gospel Mission, and he's seen Christ work mightily in his life. And you know what he wants to do? He wants to make disciples. He's got to go out and get a job. He doesn't have a retirement, so he has to go out and get a job. But he wants his job to support what he is doing in terms of the church. That's what he wants. Isn't that amazing? Christ will take care of you. So, brought up children. Who should be on the list? Those who have brought up children, those who have shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints. Now, does that mean you're going to start a foot washing ministry? No, it just means that there's no level of service that you're not willing to give, no matter how humble it might be. That's what that means. It's Jesus. He actually did wash the disciples' feet, and he said, do as I've done to you, to others, right? And that didn't mean everybody wash everybody else's feet. That meant serve in a way that is needed, no matter how lowly or insignificant it might be. This is to characterize the older women in the church who can be taken care of by the church. And notice this, cared for the afflicted, cared for those who are suffering. I know there was one lady in our life that Kelly really loved. I loved her too, and she was just really a minister to Kelly. She's the kind of woman who you wondered if she loved your kids more than you did, because she really enjoyed our children. And I know that helped Kelly huge, because as Kelly was going through suffering in different times and trials, she had her and a lot of other women who were helping her in that time of affliction, in that time of hardness, in that time of suffering. And I know there's this one man, I know you guys know maybe who he is, but he would constantly remind me, as when he was afflicted, he had COVID and his family had COVID, and he keeps telling me how my daughter went over there and cleaned their house, cleaned their son's room, which was really a trial for her. That was affliction. And all this. And you think about it and you're like, wow, that's God doing that in those people and allowing those people to see Christ in it. He lamented how nobody in his church did that for him. Now, I'm not puffing up our church. I'm just showing where's Christ working and how do you see him work? Is this the way you see him? And notice, and has devoted herself to every good work. So let me give you a couple more examples of this. Turn to, as I give you this example, let me also add this, because where we're going to turn illustrates both. Notice verse 16 before we turn to the illustration. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. So now go to Acts 9:36, and we'll see a picture of this. Acts 9:36. Now there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which translated means Dorcas. Now, I know you read that name and you're like, that's unfortunate. But you know, the name actually means gazelle. That's kind of a pretty name. She was full of good works. There you go. See, now here's an example, right? Full of good works and acts of charity, acts of love. In those days, she became ill and died. And when they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. Wow. So she's been washed. She's been laid in an upper room. I don't know how long has she been dead? I don't even know. Since Lydia was near Joppa, the disciples, hearing that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him. So think about this. Notice how she's described. We don't know if Dorcas is married or not. Probably not. Nothing's mentioned of her husband. But how is she described? a disciple. Hearing that Peter was there, verse 38, sent 2 men to him, urging him, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter rose and went with them. And when he arrived, they took him to the upper room. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other garments that Dorcas made while she was with them. See, she was full of good works and acts of charity. All these widows rallied around and depended on her gifts and on her abilities. They were ministered to by her, and other garments that Dorcas made while she was with them. But Peter put them all outside, knelt down and prayed, and turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, arise." And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. And he gave her his hand and raised her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days with one Simon a tanner. Now, do you notice here, the widows all knew her. And she was serving them. And she was well known by the church. So we don't know if she was supported by the church. It doesn't say one or the other. But she was serving among the widows. So please understand, your ministry, when you're, in one sense, free from your husband in the future, is to Christ and to his people, right? And I know this is a sad thing to say. At the same time, it's a glorious thing. How have you influenced, as an older woman, how are you influencing the people around you? Because as you influence them a certain way, when you pass and the people know that you do, and you're part of this church, what are they going to hear at your memorial service? In other words, if you're ministering also to your neighbors, to your chiropractor, to your dentist, to your doctor, and to the people around you, and they see godliness in you, that may be the very impetus to them coming to Christ while you're alive, and maybe after you're gone. Your ministry continues. You see how powerful Christ is. I see how powerful Christ is because I see it here. It's very interesting. God's been showing me his power in a number of ways. One of the ways he's shown me his power recently is in those who have gone from the darkness to light at Union Gospel Mission. These guys, they've left their, idolatry, and they've come into, and Christ has just pulled them out of that. And I don't really know that in my own experience, because I was saved when I was like 4 or 6 or something. And so, but I get to see that now. I get to see the power of Christ in these guys' lives now. And I'm seeing, and I get to see the power of Christ in many of you who, it seems like conversation after conversation we're having in taking care of our parents. Over and over and over again I hear what God is doing in order to assist you to care for your parents. And as hard as you thought it might be, you find that he steps in and he rescues you and makes it easy, changing the heart of the older people you're dealing with, giving them a compliant way even, or God giving them enough clarity to accept the thing that's right. Isn't that amazing? That's absolutely amazing. And that's the power of Christ, because he wants to take care of them. There's no better people to take care of older people than the church, right? Because they're days, weeks, months, years away from going on into eternity. And then everything you said to your parents before that, and they maybe weren't Christians, or they were saying you're all wet, you're washed up, and then they start listening, and then the way you care for them, that's possible for Christ to use that, isn't it? And that's a privilege to be used. So I don't care how old you are, your ministry might just begin. Please don't look at your life and say, well, we're this age now, we have a right now to kick back. No. Your life will be unfulfilled if you just decide, I'm going to go to the seashore and collect seashells. You will not be fulfilled in that. Your ministry may very well begin at an older age than you ever thought. And that is awesome. That is great because you could be fruitful for Christ. More fruitful for Christ than you look at other people and you look at, I don't know who you look at and who you look up to in terms of spiritual pace setting and fruitfulness, but you can be exceedingly fruitful in life later, in late life. I'm promising you that, because that's the way Christ works. Look at these examples, right? Look at that's why there's a community of widows gathered together to love the young families. That's what you get to look forward to, younger ladies. In the future, you get to care for Christ's church. And older ladies, that's what you get to do now. And church, everyone who has family and has older ladies, you get to care for them now. You get to pray for them now. You get to spend time with them now. You get to play games with them now. Play games, right? Play games with them. I remember, I forget how often we did this. We used to go visit Joan. She was the secretary at Calvary Community Church when Kelly and I lived in Brentwood. And we'd go over there every, few months and just play games with Joan and spend time with her. Joan Wallace, she was the secretary. She was Frank's secretary. My kids are looking back there, who's this? Now, my dear friend Frank is gone. And so we try to go out and visit Judy monthly and just be with her, hang out. We try. We don't usually get it monthly. We try. But so just understand this is a ministry, and you're all responsible for it to do this ministry in one way or another. Pray about it. How are you going to look out for and if you think about it, how dangerous is it to not be a Christian and to be a widow in the future in our culture? That's a scary thing, right? Government's going to take care of you, right? That's a scary thing. It's not supposed to be that way because the church is weak in the United States, because it isn't doing things that God would call it to do, because it's not holding to the word like it could. There's a lot of pain for people who might be spared that. So here's what we're doing. We're fulfilling the word of Christ as we look out for one another, as we recognize that you're not disqualified from ministry no matter how old you are. And you're going to trust the Lord that He's going to use you, take care of you, and that He's going to energize you to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. And this is all, you see how this is the glory of Christ in the ministry of widows. Right? You see the glory of Christ now in the ministry of widows. And it's a double meaning, isn't it? Because they're going to minister to us in ways that we really need it. And we're going to minister to them in ways that they need it. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your Son who came, died for us, robbed us of our sin, and now we are able to live as He did here for those who cannot take care of themselves. We consider this coming memorial we're about to engage in right now with communion. And we recognize that this care from our Christ is why we care for widows. This care is for widows. This going to the cross cares for widows, cares for children, grandchildren, men and women of all shapes and sizes and all ages. Thank you for coming and serving us, laying down your life for us so that we know how to lay down our life for others. Assist us in remembering what you have done as we sing and as we remember your death and resurrection. In Jesus' name, amen.